Hello and welcome back to the only show whose three favorite musicians include John Williams, Max Rebo, and Weird Al Yankovic. I'm Max.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Force for Thought. Today, we're talking about retcons and changes made in the Star Wars universe, as they are abundant and they are usually pretty famous or infamous, depending on how you want to look at it. But I wanted to start real quick on just a kind of a conversation on retcons in general. First off, for anyone who doesn't know, retcon is just a shortened abbreviation for retroactive continuity. And I'm looking it up right now. The definition is, in film, television series, or other fictional work, a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events, typically used to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or account for an inconsistency. And I wanted to talk about that right off the top because oftentimes when I talk about retcons, I feel like a lot of people have different ideas of what a retcon is or the connotations that go with a retcon. I feel like oftentimes when people talk about like, oh, Star Wars retcon this, it comes with a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. What do you guys think about that?
I agree. People definitely default to hating retcons, but I think it's just because they don't recognize all of the other retcons in properties well beyond Star Wars, but Star Wars alone has plenty of retcons that people cherish and admire, and because there's so many that people dislike, it kind of muddies the whole word, like you said.
Do either of you have a different definition of retcon?
No, I was surprised you had to say it. Is that a Webster dictionary definition, or is that different?
The first one that came up on Google. Let's see.
Let's confirm with Webster.
This is from Oxford Languages.
Okay.
Yeah.
So take it with a grain of salt. It's not Webster. Miriam's rolling in his grave right now. Who the hell?
Despite being conscious of this unjust kind of connotation that the word retcon and retcons in general have, I still personally have a hard time accepting retcons. Like I still go into them pessimistically, or when I see one, I'm usually pretty displeased more than optimistic or open-minded. So even though I know that this is a problem, I still suffer from it as well.
Well,
I think it depends on what it is. Like, just because it's I'm sure we're going to talk about it a little bit. Like, it's not a retcon, I guess. I guess this isn't a retcon, but I was going to say the fact that like Ahsoka is Anakin's Padawan. It's like, it's not a retcon, but we didn't know, so they're just filling in the gaps. So I guess that's not really
I think
a
according
retcon.
to that definition, it absolutely is a retcon.
That
was one of the ones that I included on my list. Yeah,
I think according to that definition, it's absolutely not a retcon. Why do you think it would be?
Because it provided a different
context, I think. Right?
Different interpretation on previously described events, typically used to facilitate. A piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events. I think Anakin having an apprentice is a new piece of information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events.
I think they would have had to previously describe him not having a Padawan for it to be a retcon. Because it's not overwriting anything, it's just adding to something. They never said something else was untrue.
I think that's an interesting
thing. Do they have to actively say it, though, or can they just imply it?
I think an implication would work as well, but they never implied that he didn't have a Padawan.
Well, in Attack of the Clones, he was a Padawan, and in Revenge of the Sith, he was still a Padawan. He just achieved... Well, he did not achieve the rank of Master.
He was not a Padawan in Revenge of the Sith.
Was he not?
No, he was a Jedi Knight.
I think that's when we talked about it. Remember? Because we like that dynamic. They're more on the same...
To be fair, I did not really realize that until many years after Revenge of the Sith. Definitely a long time ago from now. But he's missing his Padawan braid, for one. And I guess that's the only on-screen indication of it. But in the 2003 2D Clone Wars animated series, he graduates and gets his braid cut off and becomes a Jedi Knight officially, which is not canon anymore. But it was when Revenge of the Sith came out.
It is not, but we do see Anakin Skywalker become knighted in the newest piece of canon work, which I am reading right now, Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade. He gets knighted in it, and they cut off his Padawan braid.
Are you serious? That's awesome. Who does it?
It's really good.
Yoda?
No, I think it's Mace Windu.
Really?
Yeah.
Ugh.
It's interesting because they lift the Jedi trials as a wartime measure. So they basically just take a whole batch of Padawans and they say, yeah, you guys are good enough. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like a big...
That is interesting.
Well, that's a big part of the plot to the book, which we'll get into at another time. But anyway, okay, so let's talk about some of these retcons then, because I had that on the list, Anakin having an apprentice between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And you say it's not even... You don't think that's a retcon?
Correct. I refute that.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the list, and we'll talk about it a little bit, and I think we'll give one of 3 answers. We'll either say it's a good retcon, it's a bad retcon, or it's not a retcon at all.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
Are we skipping over the one that the Ahsoka one then already? Or is
No,
that,
I think
okay.
we talked about it. I would
Okay.
say that's a good retcon. I think that is a retcon.
I think so too. It is weird though because there's this a fine line between you're right though. There's no reason for us not to believe that potentially didn't happen. But the fact that Ahsoka is missing in Revenge of the Sith or any sort of talk of her, right? It's just the fact that obviously it was retconned in later, right? I guess how else would you say that besides it's retconned in later because it's not like a known thing. So you kind of fill in those gaps. It's not a bad thing.
We're gonna have to come up with a different term. I'm sure it's out there. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But for something that is expanded upon of the middle of a story that we didn't know when the end of the story was told, without being a retcon. For it to be a retcon, it has to undo some part of the story. It can't just add to it. In my mind.
That's true. I think it's too.
Interesting.
I know it's odd. It's just like two. I feel like it's like almost like different sides of the same coin.
How
For
so?
me. No, I feel like you're right. I think you're right. It's like retconning is going back on something like some of the ones that we're going to be talking about. But at the same time, it does feel like it is retconned. The fact that a piece of media is
I'm trying to scan ahead on the list and trying to find a good one that would challenge that interpretation, I guess.
Yeah.
So let's talk about adding Jabba the Hutt to A New Hope. So in the original A New Hope, Jabba the Hutt was not in it. And then I think was it in 97 special edition, they went back and they CGI'd him in there. I consider that to be a retcon. Luke, do you think that's a retcon?
I do not think that's a retcon.
I do.
I think Jabba the Hutt had to be explicitly somewhere else in the original story for them to retcon that story beat to say that's no longer true. He was actually at Tatooine.
But
Even though it was like a very physical retcon where they literally went back and edited in an entire new scene to the movie.
Yeah, technically I understand how it could be seen as a retcon, but because it doesn't undo any piece of narrative, I think it is a perfectly acceptable story element to add after the fact.
Is there not the scene in the original cuts of him as a person, as a physical being? The guy with
I don't think that ever made it to a cut, but yes,
it
there
not?
It was never released. I've seen that
Okay.
also.
there's footage
as a
of it.
deleted
Yeah,
scene or something.
they originally filmed it with somebody else.
Isn't it weird we know a lot about Star Wars, but I still feel like something like that, maybe that was just me, but there is this myth, I feel like, or this weirdness of this kind of hazy, since we weren't alive or there in 1977, that we're like, I guess I'm going to take someone else's word for it.
Yeah, I have that thought often.
Are you guys absolutely certain that you have seen at least one time a copy of the 77 theatrical release version?
I would not. Yes, I feel like
I'd say I'm certain I haven't.
I don't think I ever have.
I think I have. I think my uncle was again like a massive Star Wars fan. I think he had every sort of physical release of the original trilogy, and bootleg versions of everything too. So I'll die on that hill.
So you think you have seen the original?
Yeah, if I have, it was literally when I was 6 years old though.
Interesting. Okay.
I know the copy that you and I had that we watched growing up. The VHS was from the 97
Correct.
re-release.
Yeah, because it started the first 30 minutes. It was probably 5, but it felt like 30 as a kid. Where that interview with George Lucas.
I don't remember that.
Malton. My God. Leonard Malton? Oh my God, the film critic.
You know who I'm talking
Leonard Malton?
Leonard Malton, yeah. He's interviewing George Lucas. That's how I learned how to read and write screenplays. Is because they showed the screenplay of A New Hope, and so I would pause it and be like, okay, what does INT mean, and figure out how to do that.
That's so interesting.
Yep.
But yeah, I remember that. That was the version that I grew up with. That one on VHS, obviously. Okay, so Luke, you don't consider that to be a retcon. I do consider that to be a retcon. I give that retcon a thumbs down. I think it's better without Jabba and just leaving him until return. Matt, what do you think?
I think that is a retcon as well. I don't know. I like that scene, but I guess it doesn't make any sense. I like the scene when you watch the full trilogy just because you see Jabba, so he's set up and then paid off in return, versus pulling kind of the Emperor cloak over your eyes, where it's he's mentioned, he's seen in one scene, and then he's finally revealed. And I feel like for Jabba, it's not that big of a deal to reveal him for this kind of B storyline. So yeah, I mean, I like it actually.
Interesting. So that one has a mix of reactions. One thumbs up, one thumbs down, and one does not apply.
Well, just because it doesn't apply as a retcon, I can still talk about my feelings on that added scene.
Yeah, please do.
I don't like it that much. I think it would have been because they talk. I mean, it was obviously released in theaters without that scene, and the story was not suffered for it. So it's obviously not completely required. I think the character design of Jabba in Return of the Jedi looks so much better than the CG version in A New Hope.
Yeah.
And I think the Return of the Jedi character design kind of suffers for it.
Music to my ears, Luke.
I know. I knew it would be.
No, I 1000% agree though, because it is wonky. Because when Han steps over his tail, it's like so weird.
You can see him being blurred as they physically
it's
edit
like,
him
what
to go
is-
up.
Yeah, it's like his leg almost extends and then goes back down. You're like,
Yeah, and Jabba has that like oddly animated, like his eyes bulge and his tongue
Yeah.
sticks out.
Yeah, that's
it makes
what I
him
was
look a lot
gonna-
less intimidating than he looks in Return of the Jedi.
And kind of like Matt, you're a big fan of Jaws. In a previous episode, you were talking about how like one of the cool things about Jaws and what makes it almost scarier is how little you see him. I think that same is true with Jabba too. I feel like showing him kind of like takes away some of the mystery. Like I like that they mention him in A New Hope, mention him in Empire, and it's not until Return that you finally see him and you're like, whoa, that's Jabba, because obviously he doesn't look anything like you expect him to unless you see him 45 minutes into A New Hope.
yeah.
But that's why I gave it the thumbs down. But anyway, all right. Moving on to another very famous retcon, Han shooting first. I think we can all agree that this one qualifies as a retcon.
This is a retcon because it changes a story detail from Han shooting first to Han shooting second. That is a story detail that was present, that was changed, and is now different.
But it's not an in-universe change, though.
How do you mean?
Yeah, what do you mean?
So when you were talking about, you said you didn't think that adding that scene with Jabba qualified as a retcon, even though it was like a very physical, they went back and they added a whole other scene. This one, they don't go back and change anything. It's not like someone later on down the road said, oh, hey, by the way, did you guys know that Greedo shot first? They literally went back, they edited the scene to show Greedo shooting first. So it doesn't change anything in the story.
I think it changes who Han is a little bit.
I refute that as well. That it doesn't change anything in the story. Han shooting first is a character beat for him, and Han shooting second is a different character beat for him.
But Han shooting first now no longer ever happened in the universe.
But I mean, it did.
Yeah.
You can't. You,
For the real ones,
that's what
it
a retcon
definitely
is.
did.
Is that that was history, and then it was retconned, and now they tried to erase that history, but they didn't. I mean, we still know that version of history.
You know what's weird though? Is I think it makes more sense for Han to shoot second in defense. I don't think he is a shoot first and then ask questions later guy, even though I think he's like a smuggler. But I feel like knowing his character through those movies, I don't think he goes from like a literal killer for Greedo to like all of a sudden becoming super soft in like Empire. I mean, soft in comparison to shooting someone in cold blood. And so I feel like with his character, it makes more sense for him to shoot second. With that being said, it's a dumb retcon, and obviously we all agree. I think Han shot first.
You give it the thumbs down for this retcon?
Yeah.
I give it a thumbs up.
Damn it.
Really?
I guess I don't know.
Why'd
I
you
don't know.
bait and switch me, Luke?
I know I did. Maybe maybe I'm just being argumentative for argumentative
With that
sake.
being said, I kind of bait and switched you too, saying that I do like it. I disagree with the retcon. With that being said, I kind of agree with the retcon. The fact that it makes more sense for that he shot second.
Yeah, maybe that's what I mean to say. If I had a glass ball and I could make my decision on this, I would probably leave it the way it was. But because it was retconned and we have it now the way it is, I do not subscribe to the Han shot first fandom. That hashtag. You'll never catch me saying that. I think George Lucas changed it, and now Greedo shot first, and that is the canon that we are to go with.
But in the new version, do they not shoot simultaneously? The McClunky version?
I think
McCulkey?
I think they didn't change anything from the 97 edition except adding an extra shot of Greedo saying McClunky.
Yeah.
I think it's the exact same
I remember
sequence.
when that came out, with just everyone, I think the three of us were like, what? like, what was that?
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, when the 97 special edition came out, they retconned the sequence between Han and Greedo so that Han no longer shoots first, Greedo shoots first, and Han does an awkward little neck twitch to avoid the shot. And then everyone kind of disliked that or whatever. The fans had feelings about it. And then, 22 years later in 2019, Disney Plus launches and A New Hope gets another new edition. Surprisingly, no one was expecting this, where it's the exact same except after Han and Greedo exchange words, there's a solo shot of Greedo and he says the word McClunky, and then they shoot each other.
And no one knows what it means either, do they?
No.
I don't think there's any subtitles for it.
Correct.
Which I like. I'll wonder that till the day I die.
It's just a very vulgar swear word in Huttese.
No, I'm hoping for a Rogue One style movie of he's trying to clue him in of what McClunky is.
McClunky, a Star Wars story.
It's like Hail Hydra, McClunky.
That's funny. Okay. All right.
So
going
for the
down
record,
list,
I
then.
do give that retcon a thumbs down, but it's not my place to decide on the story, so I do subscribe to that as part of the canon, that Han shot second.
Yeah, I agree with that. I recognize that that's a retcon, and I also give it a thumbs down. I think it was probably better the way it was. All right. Let's talk about another one. Again, I'm trying to go out of order because I'm trying to build off of the conversation that I was trying to argue with Luke about. So let's talk about Vader being Luke's father, because that is an in-universe retcon where Luke was specifically told that his father had died. And then later in in A New Hope, Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Luke Skywalker that his father died. And then in Empire, Darth Vader reveals himself to be Luke's father. And then later in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan says, well, your father did die, from a certain point of view. That is, in my opinion, the gold standard of a retcon. That is exactly what a retcon is.
That is literally what I was about to say.
It is in universe. And that's what I was trying to say about like Han shooting first. Like Han shooting first no longer occurs in universe. This is like adding an extra line in a sequel to go back and to recontextualize that and say like, hey, that was wrong, but
I think
from a certain point of view, I was right.
the Obi-Wan in Return of the Jedi is like the most glaringly obvious version. When Vader says, "No, I'm your father," it's like, oh, that's crazy. Like Obi-Wan just like want to protect Luke, whatever. The fact that they added in Return. When Obi-Wan says that, to me, then it becomes glaringly obvious that they did not know what they were like. They could have not said anything, and I'm like, "Oh, Obi-Wan, right? Just want to protect Luke, whatever, blah blah blah." And so, I mean, that's just McClunky writing.
You were waiting for that, weren't you?
I started.
Did you
with
write that down 5 minutes ago?
No, I started with a joke though, and then worked backwards of how I was going to say it.
That's funny. Luke, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, 2 thumbs up for this retcon. I think this is the textbook definition of a retcon, and I agree with everything you said. The story is better for it. It's a good retcon. The only thing is that I do get bothered when watching Return of the Jedi, how they kind of stop the story for a little bit to really iron out this retcon, and I wish that didn't have to happen. I don't see a way around it the way the first 2 movies came out, because I do think that's an important story beat to know that, you know, Obi-Wan wasn't just ignorant or lying for lying's sake, but what are you gonna do? That's the price you have to pay to make a retcon like this, and relatively speaking, it's a small enough price and it's worth it.
And I think that's the basis of we've talked about this a lot before, but I think in the fandom that like we've come to like expect like retconning because like or just like filling in those gaps within Star Wars, because I think it is a bold move to like understand and see, you know, when you're writing something or when you're making it, right, when they didn't see the bigger picture, they just were so in the weeds. But then I think it takes a lot of guts to be like, actually, we're gonna make this thing way bigger than we even thought and connect these characters in a different way. And I think that's like a ballsy move to do that. And yeah, I mean, like you said, it's the gold standard of it, and it done right until Return.
Yeah, we don't have to get into it now as a Return defender. I'll just say that there is some other important stuff that happens in that scene, but they kept it short, which is better than what they did in Empire. But anyway, I digress. We don't have to.
I don't want to step on your toes in terms of the structure, but is the other important stuff in that scene the other retcon of Luke and Leia being twins?
That is later on my list. Yes, I guess we can jump to that one right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that?
That scene was so important because they had to do like several retcons all in the span of a few minutes. That retcon I don't like. It's hard to even think about a universe where Luke and Leia are not twin siblings, but if you just take the original trilogy as it's coming out, it makes no sense.
Yeah, 1000%. I rewatching them, I was like, I think there's a lot of difference between like Star Wars being a fandom and then the actual Star Wars movies themselves, where right we just live with this knowledge on a daily basis. They're like, yeah, they're sister or they're brother and sister. And then when the prequels were coming out when we were kids, it was like, yeah, we have this knowledge now. But like rewatching the original trilogy within that bubble, it's like, yeah, makes zero sense.
Yeah, I would love to be a fly on the wall in 1983 when Luke has that moment where he just says like Leia, like his eyes light up like he's always known. Like, what were people thinking then? That was That is so out of left field.
Yeah.
I always have to think about that because, like Matt said earlier, like we weren't alive when these movies were coming out. Like we were just born and these all existed.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't remember when that was revealed to me. That was just always true to me.
Yeah.
So it is hard to put myself in those shoes and being like, okay, imagine I watched this first movie, waited 3 years for the second, and now 6 years later, I'm finding out that they're twins. Like,
Yeah.
Huh?
There is this, I think there's this element to like, nowadays, if that would have happened, it would have been torn apart on the internet and blah, blah,
Oh, yeah.
blah. And so I think there is something to like being a little less harsh and seeing where things kind of can go and marinate after a while. Because like,
yeah.
Don't make dumb movies, but like things like that, obviously, I mean, look, I mean, if people tore that apart, we would not have Star Wars at all past 1983.
Yeah. I 100% agree because
No.
I give this retcon a thumbs up. But like I said,
Really?
if I were
agree.
in the
For
theater,
the story
You give it a
itself-
thumbs up?
for the story
Absolutely.
itself, not the way it's done, but the story itself. When
Yeah.
when Han realizes that they're brother and sister, that alone, I'm like, yeah, that's a good fake out.
that too, but I mean the entire prequels leading up to it
Yeah.
and everything like that. I mean, it is hard to say like, oh, that's a good retcon. How long ago was 83? 40 years ago? 40
Yeah.
exactly, because Return.
Yep.
Yeah. 40 years ago to be like, oh yeah, that was a good retcon. Now that 40 years of more material has come out to help recontextualize
Yeah.
that and cement it into the Star Wars.
Star Wars is a retcon
mythos,
as a
but-
whole. Like
Yeah,
the whole
it's
everything.
just a series of retcons one after the other. But this retcon is especially offensive because it's not just retconning from A New Hope where they, she gives him a kiss for luck, and in Empire when they kiss each other again, but in the end of Empire when Yoda says, or Obi-Wan says, that boy is our last hope, and Yoda says, no, there is another, implying that Yoda knows Luke has a sister and Obi-Wan doesn't. Like, it's an extra retcon for even that scene. Like, it didn't have to be late. It could have been.
So you think a
so many
retcon can be
people.
based off an implication?
That it's tricky to define an implication and what exactly it's
Okay.
implying.
You
But
was-
I mean, that scene is obviously retconned in Return of the Jedi. Would you agree?
I would, but I think a retcon can be based on an implication.
Yeah, I guess we're just talking about the severity of the implication then.
This episode is the A storyline is us. What is a retcon, and the B storyline is Star Wars. Because we keep weaving back to wait, what is it?
I know, and I keep thinking about that because it's not as black and white as I initially thought when we started recording.
It is, but it's an interesting topic, and that's why we're talking about it.
Yeah, I thought we would have had this down, and now I'm questioning everything.
Another thing about the retcon that Luke and Leia are twins is that it doesn't really come up in that much. I mean,
You mean in the rest of Return?
in the
I
rest
mean,
of Star Wars, like it comes up, the fact that Luke and Leia are twins, like the sequels were, it doesn't matter. They could have just been friends. It never
Yeah.
comes up that they're siblings. Ben Solo is Luke's nephew. Could have just been his friend's son. Didn't really matter. The only story that I can really think where it really came up was Star Wars Bloodlines by Claudia Gray, where there's a significant part about Leia being in public office in the New Republic, and it comes out that she is Darth Vader's daughter, and
Yeah.
that's bad for politics. But
I think
that's like the only story I can think of.
I've never thought about this before.
Leia being
Yeah.
force sensitive, like that was basically another retcon because they had the retcon of Luke and Leia being siblings, but then she
but
wasn't force
they never said
sensitive,
that she
and then-
wasn't trained in the Force, though.
I
So
know.
again, you're going off an implication.
I am, but yeah, it just doesn't come up that much.
I think we're gonna get into it in a few, but I think that's the biggest offense to this is that when they did the prequels, there was like almost no thought to it, and that's probably the worst offender with the retconning, right? Like it's just left and right, nothing is kind of making sense, and you're
You
like,
mean just retcons in general in the prequels?
yeah, or like not considering how this actually could tie in or make more sense if you rewatch them as a 6-movie.
Yeah,
You know.
because ideally you have a direction, right? You know exactly
Yeah.
where everything is beforehand, and everything kind of falls into place neatly.
Yeah, they had-
not to throw the whole sequel trilogy under the bus, but I'll say unlike the sequel trilogy where it was just very clear that JJ was there to start off a trilogy. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how it ended, and then he handed off the baton and then wasn't expecting it to come back around, and that's why we got so many retcons in The Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, no, but I mean just like in the prequels, right? That's yes. I said prequels before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just making sure because it's like you know how the story ends, so just reverse it. But instead, they made it so much more complicated. But yeah,
Let's talk about that a little
Yes.
bit, by making Anakin the creator of C-3PO.
yeah,
That's a little unnecessary.
it
That's
is indeed.
I was thinking about. I knew you were going to bring this up, and it kind of steps in the sand of my theory on the definition of a retcon because it is not explicitly stated who created C-3PO. But boy, is it not implied that it's Darth Vader.
Yeah.
So I do consider this a retcon.
Because it just in my mind, it's like you could write anything you wanted. Presumably, you have whatever you want budget, and that's what you go with. Is the fact that it's like, like it just doesn't. You could fit him in the story any other way.
Yeah, like R2. Like they did a good job with him, making him an astromech on the Naboo. Naboo.
The Royal Star Cruiser.
Yeah. What's something from Naboo?
Nubian?
Nubian.
Nubian.
I like Naboobian.
I was about to say Naboobian, but I'm sure that's not
We would
right.
know if that was it.
Hold on.
You would know if that was it.
I agree. This is a retcon. I give it a thumbs up. Just
Really?
well, I don't
But
know.
Luke and Leia being twins, you're like, no.
It's hard to
because we grew up with
separate
it,
it
too.
because from the retcon of who C-3PO is in the original trilogy and the story that Anakin built C-3PO, and then he, came back and C-3PO was still with his mom, and then he took C-3PO because it's his, and it's a reminder of his mom. And then Padme had R2-D2, and they exchanged each other. Padme and Anakin exchanged R2 and 3PO as wedding gifts when they got married, and then C-3PO was Padme's protocol droid, and R2 was Anakin's astromech. And that's all really great story elements for the prequels, and
That's beautiful. I've never even thought about that. What do you mean they exchanged them as wedding gifts? Is
that's
that
canon.
in what?
A book. I can't remember the exact one.
Was it like the novelization of Attack of the Clones?
No, I don't think so. I don't know, but it is canon.
Because that actually makes so much sense now. That R2 came from Padme and C-3PO came from Anakin.
And C-3PO exclusively hangs out with Padme in Revenge of the Sith, and R2 exclusively with Anakin.
Yeah.
Wow, this was a big thumbs down going into this conversation. I'm gonna give it a thumbs up. Luke changed my mind.
They did
Yeah.
they did do something with it. So
Yeah,
I think it's one of those things where we grew up with it, so it's like it's just right, just like the knowledge that we have. So I think it's impossible, but it's like it just makes it so more I remember being a kid and being like, I am so confused. How do they not nowadays? Nobody recognize each other. What is going on? But yeah, I'm okay with it.
yeah. This ties into the revelation that I had a couple episodes ago, where I found out that at the end of Revenge of the Sith, they wiped only the protocol droids and not R2-D2s. But anyway, I'm still wrapping my mind around that one. All right, so moving on. Let's see, what else do we got here?
So just to be clear, we do give that retcon a thumbs up.
Sure.
I do.
Because it's definitely while it's never explicitly stated, I think it is a retcon that the droids in A New Hope happen to be Luke Skywalker's birth parents' droids individually, and then they come together, and that's definitely a lot of stuff that is not natural. That is a retcon, but
Yeah.
That is.
I
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah, no, I gave it a thumbs down going into this conversation, but you changed my mind. I like that a lot now, the more I think about it. All right,
Good.
let's talk about
That's what we're out here for. Celebrate Star Wars, make us like it more.
keeping an open mind, you know?
Yeah.
You got to be able to change your mind on stuff. Let's talk about the Death Star plot hole. Do you consider this a retcon, that there was a small hole the size of a womp rat where if you just placed the perfect ion cannon, it would have blown the whole thing up, and then they retconned exactly why that existed all throughout Rogue One? Do you consider Rogue One to be a giant retcon?
All the wind in my sails are completely going away because yes, I do consider this to be a retcon, even though it's not explicitly stated that the Death Star was manufactured to precise safety standards. I think that this is what it was implied that it was indestructible, and the fact that it's not being retconned to being a design choice, I think that's a retcon, and I think it's a good one. Yes.
So you're also changing your mind this episode as far as your definition of a retcon. You're loosening up a little bit.
I am. I
All right.
still don't think that
We're all
Ahsoka
making concessions.
being Anakin's Padawan is a retcon. I
All
think
right,
that's
all right.
less of a severe implication. How do you grade implications like this,
know
though?
it's
I think
tough,
it is
man.
very strongly implied that the Death Star was not built by a rebel mole
Yes,
in
I agree.
A New Hope.
I agree with that. I don't think Rogue One is necessarily a retcon versus just kind of, I don't know, thickening that plot, I guess, because we knew that there is one chance to blow it up, and so we just found out why. So I don't think it is a retcon, personally, because it's not like they go back on something. With that being said, like you said, the fact that who it's built by, that, yeah, I don't think it's implied at all that it's a rebel mole.
I guess and this might be more nuanced, but maybe there's also a distinction between a retcon and an origin story.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say that's true.
Maybe
yeah.
some things aren't retcons, it's just the origin.
Yeah.
And I'll bring up kind of a silly one, which is Han's dice.
Yeah,
So in the original trilogy, you can see the dice. They're kind of
for like 2 seconds.
yeah,
That's a prop
they're not
decoration.
very
Yeah.
they're not very prominent, but for whatever reason, circa 20 17 and 18, they thought it was very big deal to bring those dice back, and you see them again in The Last Jedi and Solo.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about that? Do you think that's a retcon, and how do you feel about it?
I don't think it's...
I like to think the powers at Disney were rewatching the original trilogy to try to find a physical token of Han Solo's to bring back, and then someone was watching it, and someone took out a big Sharpie and just circled this little 1-inch frame of the TV of those dice and said, "Here it is. This is gonna be our key."
I think they were doing the same thing, but for toys' sake. I think they were going to be like, everyone's going to want to hang these in their car. Like, I think there was going to be like a marketing thing.
And then after the fans hated The Last Jedi and Solo bombed, they were like, maybe we don't go through with making these dice.
Maybe we don't do the dice. Yeah, there's just like hundreds in a warehouse.
Kathleen Kennedy takes them off her rearview mirror.
As she's on her way to work, she'd do the box office numbers.
There's a country somewhere in Africa of everyone wearing like all the losing Super Bowl teams Super Bowl winning shirts and carrying around Star Wars merchandise of those dice.
If Star Wars was made in the 80s or 90s, those would have been really big fuzzy dice.
So real quick, where do we land on that? Do you think it's a retcon, and thumbs up or thumbs down?
Han Solo's dice?
Yeah.
I don't think it's a retcon.
Same.
You just think that's an origin?
It's there. Yeah.
It's just something that was expanded upon.
Yeah.
It's not overwriting anything that was even thought about a little bit by anyone
and it makes
before
sense
this.
For his character. My biggest thing is just like, why were they in that one shot?
In the original trilogy?
Yeah.
I guess I don't know the history as well as I should. They're
No,
only in one shot. I assume they
they're-
were in the cockpit the whole time. They're
No,
not?
I think it's only in one shot.
Really?
I believe
They
I
might
could be
have
wrong.
they might have been in there the entire
Or-
time, but it's only visible in one
Yes,
shot.
I think
don't
that
know.
might be more like I would almost. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like I don't know. I just want more things to expand. I was like, I want a scene where they're stolen from somebody and blah 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 in Cloud City, but nope, I don't want that actually because it does not matter.
All right, so we all agree then that one does not apply. That is not a retcon. That's
Yeah.
just more of a origin story to Han Solo's mirrored dice.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about another explicit retcon, Rey being a Palpatine. It was hinted
Yeah.
in The Force Awakens that her origin was going to be significant.
Sure.
And then we find out in The Last Jedi that she is nobody, she comes from nobody, and that her parents died in a pauper's grave in the Jakku Desert. Only for that to be explicitly retconned later in The Rise of Skywalker when Kylo Ren tells her that she is a Palpatine.
Yeah, they've made a big effort to do it like Return of the Jedi, and Kylo Ren's like, your parents were nobody. I never lied to you. They chose to be nobody. But like, come on, Kylo. They're obviously like a clone of Palpatine is her dad. Like that's
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
More,
I mean,
more McClunky writing.
It's more McClunky writing. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm trying to figure out like how would you go and proceed with. Maybe we should talk about this as another episode. But I'm wondering like how almost redoing the sequel trilogy and how we would have done it after whether Force Awakens or Last Jedi and how we would have kind of finished that trilogy out. But I mean, yeah, that's a massive retcon that I don't think deserves. It just doesn't feel deserved at all, or it doesn't feel like a payoff. You just kind of find that information, and we're like, well, we all knew that was coming because, like, after Last Jedi, we were like, there's no way that's going to be settled. And I do like Kylo being the unreliable narrator. I think that's a really interesting story aspect for it. That the
But
dark
Rey's
side,
the one that says her parents were nobody first, before Kylo says it in The Last Jedi.
yeah,
That's true, but he kind of gets it out of
solidifies
her.
it for. Yeah, I mean,
he's the one who draws it from her,
either way, I
guess.
mean, I think that is a really fun thing. But I mean, the Palpatine thing itself, I think, it's not deserved. It doesn't feel like a payoff at all. But I mean, I'm trying to think of how else you would end that trilogy now. But that's a
I
separate
know.
thing.
I feel like it was
In the same way, the reason I give it a thumbs down is I think this was a retcon significantly for the worse. I think
Yeah.
it was such a good idea to have a trilogy all about how in a world of Skywalkers and the importance of Skywalkers, anybody can grow up to
Yeah.
be a Luke Skywalker. You don't need that in your blood. You don't need that to be your name. And then they kind of did that in the first two movies, and I really like that. And then The Rise of Skywalker, they were like, actually, Rey's a Palpatine, and she's voluntarily choosing to be a Skywalker.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, well then, what about Broom Boy? Like, does Broom Boy have a chance then? Can he too
Yeah.
become Luke Skywalker, or does it actually rely completely on your bloodline?
you clearly haven't read my fan theory about Broom Boy Fisto.
That's really funny.
Please indulge us.
LT.
I kid, but I agree. This is a thumbs down retcon. It's just such a it's got to be the most direct retcon in all of Star Wars, right?
1000%.
Like, it was so explicit in literally the movie prior to just completely go.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just taking a left turn. It's taking a 180, backtracking for a couple miles, and then taking a left turn.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, 1000%. It's not like a stupid little character thing or like the droids thing that you can really expand upon. It's like, no, this is just kind of like, let's undo what was said.
Yeah, I feel like the writers had that line at the end where Palpatine says, Darth Vader, or Anakin Skywalker was saved by his son. The only family you have here is me. I feel like they wrote that line. They were like, oh, this would be cool if we fit this in somehow. And they're like, well, then that would mean we have to do this and then this and then this and then this. And they're like, okay, just keep going.
Yeah.
And that's how they wrote the entire script.
Right. But in order for Palpatine to have a daughter, he would have had to have been how old? Let's just make her a granddaughter. Okay. And then who are the parents? Don't worry about that part.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of steps that
Yeah.
they had to take to make those connect.
What's funny is that we always talk about Obi-Wan's brother and how that's crazy, right?
Mhm.
But the fact that we never talk
I
about...
say it's crazy. You say,
Sorry,
you talk about Obi-Wan's brother. I say that's crazy.
You say it's crazy. We love it. But in the same turn, Luke, I was good. This is for you. Is that like we never talk about Palpatine's daughter or son at all? So
Because it's not his son, it's his clone.
in the
Yeah,
s-
it was
oh,
like one of his first clones. They talk about it in the novelization. I don't know the full
Yeah.
story of
They
it.
talk about it a lot more in the book. Oh my god, I'm blanking on it, and I read it. I don't remember the name of it.
That's okay.
But his name is Dathan. Ray's mom is named Miramir, and it's a pretty good story about them.
Dathan, terrible name. You know that kid's gonna be a dick.
Interesting. All right, so we all agree that is a retcon for the worse. Let's talk about another one, I guess more of an implication. Obi-Wan and Vader confronting each other between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. So obviously when Obi-Wan and Darth Vader have their final duel on the Death Star in A New Hope, Darth Vader has his famous line where he says, "Last time I saw you, I was but a learner, now I am the master." And then when we left off in Revenge of the Sith, again, I thought he was his apprentice still. Apparently he was a Jedi Knight, but Obi-Wan was still his master. So I guess that line still works, right? And then later retconned in Kenobi to have this other showdown between the two, in between those two incidents. I don't know the planet. Do we know the
I
planet
actually think that
showdown is?
planet is unnamed.
Serious?
I
Okay,
believe
good. I
so.
feel better for not knowing that then. In the Kenobi show, though, they have that showdown.
Mhm.
So how do you guys feel about that? Is that a retcon?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think that implication is strong enough.
I
that
agree with
That was the
Luke.
last time they saw each other.
I also think it's still valid. I mean, Obi-Wan's always going to be his master no matter what, right? It's like
Yeah, and Darth Vader's always learning.
yes, exactly. And so
And
I
they
think,
did that very well with the flashbacks, too.
Yep,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the exact same thing is that like no matter and he lost at the end of that fight. So
Mm-hmm.
he's still, not as good as Obi-Wan. So he's still the master and still the Padawan dynamic.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I would say it's a retcon, but I think it's for the better. I think it's great. I love that showdown in Kenobi.
Yeah.
I've talked about Kenobi before. I like it a lot. I think that everything with Obi-Wan and Vader work really well, and that's the big climax was the showdown, right? And I think
Yeah.
it worked out really well. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I like it. I think this is not a retcon, and I have a thumbs up as a story element for
Yep.
it. What do you think it is or not a retcon?
I don't think so, Retcon, no.
I thought that's what you were saying. I just wanted you to
No,
officially say
sorry,
it so
I was
we could
just
agree on
sorry,
something.
I was agreeing with you to close the chapter and move on.
All right. What about another implication? But this one's a much heavier implication, so I'm thinking Luke's going to assume that this is a retcon. Palpatine surviving.
I mean, that's a Retcon.
that is a retcon.
No one ever said, "Oh, yes, can confirm Palpatine is dead." But yes, that is a strong enough implication.
I mean,
It
that
is
dude
heavily
was dead.
implied that the essence of your spirit dies with your body, based on what we've seen from
then-
every other death in and out of Star Wars for all time.
Not only that, but like it explodes at the end of Return of the Jedi. He falls down and there is an explosion.
And there's a mini explosion in the reactor when he gets to the bottom.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
And then the entire Death Star
and
blows
then-
up on top
yeah,
of that.
This double explosion.
There's three ways he should have been dead.
Yeah.
You want to know how I retconned it in my mind when this first started happening? Remember in Iron Man 3 when Tony Stark starts sending his armor like to
Yep.
Pepper Potts? That's how I imagine Palpatine sending his essence off to Exegol. He like
essence-
strikes a pose and he's like, "Go to Exegol,"
That's interesting.
and then his body dies.
I have a very elaborate fan fiction. I guess that Matt and I are currently working on. Matt and I are writing this fan fiction show, and we have it planned out very elaborately and very far ahead. But anyway, this would happen in like the 4th season or so. Basically, it's like a Horcrux. Like, I think that Palpatine did die, but like before he died, he put enough of his Force essence into a Sith holocron located in the temple on Coruscant.
So
and that's the only way they were
Horcrux-
able to bring him back.
Horcrux is a Harry Potter thing, and I'm not that up to date on my Harry Potter. So Palpatine put enough of his essence into this Horcrux, and then his followers grew it, and they like grew their own Palpatine.
It's not like grown, but
Yeah,
I mean they
Like,
used it to
like they're
clone him. Like they
they're watering him, and then he
No,
sprouts.
Not like an actual, yeah. Well, I think it also is like he I think it's a little bit more valid in the fact that if he was gonna go there and knowingly Luke Skywalker, his plan was for Luke Skywalker to strike him down. If he knew he was going to die, or the plan was for him to die, presumably, he's got a failsafe somewhere.
he is a man of contingencies.
Yes, is that we've consistently
Yeah.
said. With that being said, if that was going to happen, lay the seed. Start planting those breadcrumbs in Force Awakens.
Yeah, because the mental steps that I had to go through to get there is elaborate, and that's why Matt and I require 4 seasons of a TV show to make it happen.
Yes, I can't believe this is the first time we're talking about that, and it's in the retcon episode.
As much as I think this is a retcon, and I don't really like it as far as being a retcon, I do think it's more similar to the C-3PO being made by Darth Vader than not, in a sense that what it means for the story, I do kind of like, because Palpatine was...
Changed my mind again, because I disagree.
Palpatine is goading Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, and then Rey in Return of the Rise of Skywalker. Palpatine was goading them to kill him so that he could transfer his essence and flow into their body, and the Sith will be reborn in them. So there's already some degree of life essence transferring that is in his plan already. So it's not that hard to believe that he could use that same ability to send his Force essence and life essence to another location and live on in a weaker form.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't change my mind. I still don't like it. I kind of agree with what you're saying. I think what you're saying is what you have to believe in order for it to make sense, right? But
it also retcons the way I interpret the scene in Return of the Jedi, because before the Rise of Skywalker, when Palpatine is saying, strike me down, let the hate flow through you, let the hate flow through you, let the hate flow through you, I thought that was just goading Luke into committing to the dark side, and then once he does, Palpatine will either have Vader save him or kill Luke or defend himself. But now when I watch that, I think he's actually trying to get Luke to kill him.
yeah, definitely. I think that definitely
I concur.
recontextualizes that scene, and that's absolutely
I
what
think
he
that's a
wants.
good retcon. I like that.
I still don't really like it.
The reason I like it is because it gels more with the rule of 2. Because also before 2019, I was pondering how the rule of 2 works in that scene, because if we are to believe the rule of 2, that there can only be 2, and Palpatine adheres to it, Palpatine is either planning on turning Luke and killing Vader on the spot, or Vader is planning on turning Luke and killing Palpatine on the spot. And that just introduces this interesting dynamic of like, they both want Luke to turn into the dark side, but as soon as he does, now they're enemies, and that's a new
like
kind of
a
intensity to that scene.
Snow Kylo situation
Yeah.
a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. I still give it a thumbs down.
That's
I
fair.
agree with everything you say, and I do like it, but not enough for me to overcome the issues that I have with it.
That's fair. I think this one needs to marinate a lot longer. I think it's going to be more like the retcon with Luke and Leia being siblings that makes no sense at the time. But in the future, when you look at the whole saga, it does make sense for Palpatine to be the villain in the sequel trilogy.
There's going to be a whole generation of Star Wars fans growing up right now who will just always know Rey as a Palpatine, and they will be confused why we're even having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think we have to wait to see if it does marinate and stick in people's brains that, like, for us, that Luke and Leia were brother and sister.
Right.
And I
Time will
think
tell.
It'll make us look foolish or arrogant and stubborn that in the future we'll look back and be like, oh, Rey was set up as this unique character that we were all wondering what her past was. And then in 2017 with The Last Jedi, they said her parents are nobody and she's just her own character. But then in 2019, it was retcon that she's a Palpatine. And so, like, our kids will be talking to us like, so from 2013, when the first trailer came out for The Force Awakens, you were so excited to see who Rey was and wondering what she was. And then from 2017 to 2019, you thought she was one thing. And then from 2019 for the rest of time, she's a Palpatine. and you just can't let go of that 1-2 year period in your life where you thought other,
Yeah.
and it makes us look dumb.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah.
That's funny, Luke.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Let's I'm gonna have to put this one in my Google Calendar for 10 years from now to remind me to listen to this and see if my thoughts have changed since then.
And if it does, let's just just exit all. Just cut all this stuff out.
The kind of like the 97 special effects, right? We'll just go back 40 years. 97, 20.
We'll go back whenever.
20.
97, 20 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
77 to 97. 20 years later, we'll go back and we'll re-edit all this.
Yep.
That is interesting. I've never thought about the passage of time and how we were set on her being nobody for 2 years. And Rise of Skywalker came out in 2019. It's already been 4 years, and I'm still not over it.
It's pretty
I'm still clinging
insignificant
on
in
to
the
that
grand scheme
2-year
of things.
period.
Because it is the implication.
It's the implication. That's a Sunny reference.
Yep.
But there's the implication. Okay, let's talk about another implication then. Let's do Boba Fett being a clone from the Clone Wars. Obviously, in the original trilogy, no one gave any sort of background into Boba Fett. He was a man of mystery, and that's kind of why people liked him. And then in 2002, when Attack of the Clones came out, we found a bounty hunter named Jango Fett with similar armor as Boba Fett, was the template for a clone army, and that as part of his payment, he demanded one clone for himself, and that was Boba Fett. How do we feel about that? Do you think that's a retcon, or do you think that's just more of an origin?
I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
on the fence. This is interesting.
I think it's.
I would have said it's not a retcon before we started talking about this today, and now I don't know if it is.
I think it is a bit of a retcon, but like we don't have any information on him, right? So it's like a retcon in the fact that it's like, I don't know. In my head, when I'm thinking of Boba Fett, it's not Tamora Mortensen, right? It's not Tem. When I'm thinking of Boba Fett in the original trilogy, I'm thinking of someone who like maybe is like Kavanthi, very cool, kind of sly. And then Tem is almost like the opposite. He's very brash, looks like a physicality of like a human nutsack. Like, I just not what I was thinking for Boba Fett. And so I think
Was that post Sarlacc pit?
It sounds like you're only talking post Sarlacc pit. I mean, think of Tamora Morrison as Jango Fett. He's very cool and
that's true.
strong.
I
and
think
he has a very Boba Fett vibe in 2002.
Yeah, that's true. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even though I agree with Matt, I think even then he still has like a very like kind of I don't know how to describe it. Like not as suave, not as like smooth as I guess how they kind of make him seem in
like,
Empire.
in
He
your
just
mind-
seems more of like a strong man.
Yes, I agree. And I think in your mind, when you think of Boba Fett talking, do you think of someone from New Zealand? Because I didn't.
Yeah, I guess probably
But
not.
like, but ultimately, I think it's like one of those things where, again, they just filled in those gaps, and so it's like not necessarily a full retcon. It's just like I think it's like a retcon with our expectations, right? And nothing will ever disappoint you more than your expectations.
So you don't think there's enough implication there to consider it a retcon? You just think it's an origin?
I am on the fence. I think whether this is an origin story or a retcon, I still give it a thumbs down just because it makes the universe feel very small.
Yep, I agree.
Like, Boba Fett is a very mysterious character, and to figure out that his origin story is actually he's quite literally the least mysterious person in the entire galaxy,
Yeah.
and that he is heavily intertwined with the story of the Jedi and the Clone Wars. Like, it's similar to what I don't know if I would define it as a retcon also, but in Rogue One, when they're on Jeddah and Jin passes Panda Baba and Dr. Evazan, and they're just there, like, it's not a retcon because it's not like they're canonically not there. It just is weird and makes the universe feel small. Like, you just keep bumping into the same people in this
I
entire
know.
galaxy.
Which is exactly what we're trying to get out of, and yet they keep on making it smaller and smaller sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you think, Max? You have said much?
You think it's a retcon?
Yeah, I'd give it a retcon. I see what you're saying though. I give
I
it
want
a
like a
retcon.
big red stamp that we just dump on this theory. Retcon.
I do give it a thumbs down as well. I guess for similar reasons. I just think it's unnecessary.
Yep, I think it is too.
Kind of like what you were pointing out about Luke and Leia being siblings and how that really isn't needed. There's no point to him being a clone.
No.
What purpose does that serve?
Right.
They just shoehorned in a Boba Fett backstory in the prequels for no reason.
His payment, he could have just had a son before he did this.
I mean, for his
Who
payment,
cares?
they could have paid him in credits.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, what a weird
There's
thing.
a million different. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. But that said, I was a kid when Attack of the Clones came out. I would have been 9 years old. So again, this is another one where I didn't have critical thinking between 99 and 2002, or I guess the day I was born to 2002, since I was born in 93, to be like, oh, I wonder what Boba Fett's backstory is. So again, this was just something that I always grew up with. So I don't like
Yep.
hate it because there was no period of time where I was like told otherwise or anything like that. I just grew up. Boba Fett's a clone. I'm like, okay, cool. It is what he is. And now I think they're starting to do cool things with it, right? I mean, yeah, Book of Boba Fett wasn't fantastic, but they're doing other cool stuff with it. Like there's a lot of assumptions that he's going to be coming back to play Captain Rex. That he's going to be he had that cameo in Obi-Wan as one of those 501st troopers and stuff like that. So it's like they're kind of tying it in cool ways. It's still unnecessary. Like it doesn't serve anything other than it's just cool tie-ins.
They
but
also
I do like it.
shot themselves in the foot, I think, by doing that, because now you have one guy who's supposed to look like all the clones, all the and now it's like they were not thinking in 2002 about 20 years from now what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I was like, wow,
I
really.
like to think Tamora Morrison was. He was setting up himself for a lifetime of success.
Yep.
He was the only one smart enough behind the scenes to be like, so George, you want me to play all these characters? And George Lucas is like, I mean, technically, yeah. And he's like, all right, I get it.
Maybe in 20 years there'll be a need for me to play a 20 years older version of these same characters too.
I was like, yeah, sure, Tim.
I think this retcon gets a thumbs down for me overall. As a retcon, the execution of it in terms of like what they've done with it since, I think 2 enthusiastic thumbs up.
Yeah,
Like,
Kind of like what I was saying with the tie-ins and stuff.
Yeah, because
Yep.
there's a ton of tie-ins. Like even in Legends and in the current canon, like Boba Fett running with that Aura Singh gang and working with Bosk and Dengar in the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
That's all awesome.
I agree.
There's a lot of good stuff with his origin story beyond just is a clone.
Yeah, they retconned it and it was like, and then they kind of fixed it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You got to retcon the retcon.
They fixed the fix, yeah.
Fix the fix, yeah.
That is the legacy of Star Wars.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
I'd like to strike my retcon from the record because it's not a retcon that he's a good character after the retcon. It's
Note for
I'm
postage.
trying to be very careful with my use of the word retcon because I do think it is a very poignant and deliberate word that people use very brashly.
All right, I will undo the stamp.
All right. Another implication. Let's talk about Obi-Wan knowing Leia. So during Kenobi, obviously, Obi-Wan went on a mission to save Leia, which he did, and they spend a lot of time together, and they obviously know each other, but they kind of tied it up in a neat bow for A New Hope when there was zero implications that that Obi-Wan knew Princess Leia. So what do you guys think about that?
I can't believe you even included this. Not a retcon.
Interesting, really.
Not a retcon, no. What do you mean there's zero implications that they never have any screen time together? They never see each other. Leia reacts appropriately when she hears Ben Kenobi came to rescue her.
in the message that Leia leaves for Obi-Wan, she says that you served my father in the Clone Wars years ago, yada yada yada. So she lays the groundwork of how she knows him and why she's reaching out. At no point in that message was she like, Obi-Wan, remember how you saved my skin 10 years ago? I need you real quick now again.
Yeah, at no point in that message that she was dumping in an astromech to leave just hopefully to find Obi-Wan. That is a message that is likely to be intercepted, and it was
Yes. I agree.
tactical diplomacy by Leia not to play her hand.
1000% agree with Luke. Exactly. Because it's like you know who that is instantly without having to say your name as well. Yeah, I 1000% agree. With that being said, it is a bit of a retcon, right? Like a little,
think so. I think so.
Yeah. Like I agree with Luke, and I think
It's a gut thing.
yeah, and they don't see each other, but it is weird. I like. It's funny because like I like that storyline, and it makes everything smoke. Like when you're looking at the prequels, and then you're looking at the show, it makes so much sense, and it's really harmonious, and I love it. But then when you look at the original trilogy, it is a little wonky. But like, so it's weird. It's like if you exclude the original trilogy, it's perfect. If you include the original trilogy, it gets a little dicier. But like you said, with the message, 1000% agree.
I think it's a retcon. I think it's for the better. I think it
Yeah, I
recontextualizes
agree.
a lot of things. They named Kylo Ren Ben Solo after
Yes.
him, which we didn't know at the time. But when Kenobi came out and you get this background of like this adventure that Leia had with Obi-Wan,
Yeah.
it makes it so much more clear why she named him Ben. Because without that story, why would she name him Ben? Because this
yeah.
guy accompanied Luke,
mean-
who saved her to the mission, but
Yeah.
she never at any point met him or saw
I was
him.
gonna say,
Or...
Max, they didn't know about that either. Like,
No, but that's the beauty of a retcon.
yeah, exactly. They were like, this would be cool for Star Wars, but they really didn't think about why that
Right.
makes sense. It's like Han is the one who I guess maybe at that point pushed for that name.
Han didn't like him at all.
what
At
I'm
no
s-
point did he enjoy him.
That's what I'm saying. But like Leia has less
Right.
reason to name.
Han, who actively disliked him, and Leia, who would allegedly not know him at all.
Unless
Name
it's
their kid
because
after him.
Obi-Wan and Luke both technically brought them together, Luke and Han, or Leia and Han.
But
That's so thin.
There's hoops. There's hoops you're jumping through to get there that
Yeah.
Kenobi answers for you.
Yeah, I agree.
The one thing I'll talk about with this one is there's a really nice short story in the A New Hope from a Certain Point of View 40th Anniversary Celebration Edition, whatever it's called. The story of Obi-Wan and Vader's final duel, and the smile he gives when he looks over and he's about to sacrifice himself, and he sees Luke and Leia reunited, and it's the culmination of his entire journey. Like, the Force is working again and brought the twins together, and here they are. It's the first time they're meeting each other. It's the first time he's seen them together since they were born, and he gives that smile, and
he knows that his
smile
job
is not an implication that he knew who Leia was, but I do think it's enough of something that this is not a retcon.
Well, he definitely knew who she was. I mean, he was there for her birth, but the retcon is that he interacted with her, and I think, well, I guess the retcon would be that Leia knew Obi-Wan, maybe. Well, no, because that's, well, I don't know. I still think it's a retcon, but yes, that is beautiful. When he looks over and he gives that smile, and he knows, like, all these years his mission is complete. The Force has sent these kids apart, and now they're coming back together.
Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think I call it a retcon, and I think it's a retcon for the better.
Yep.
I give it an enthusiastic thumbs up.
Same.
Thumbs up. Origin story, not a retcon.
All right, let me look over the list real quick, make sure I didn't miss anything. Similar to Palpatine dying, I also had Maul dying.
Best retcon in Star Wars.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely a retcon. You saw him
yeah.
get cut in half and fall down a bottomless pit.
Heavily implied death.
That is probably the most implied you can get without it being explicit, because it's like, maybe you can say like, oh, well, he was still blinking as his bodies were falling down.
Right.
But
There's also that that theory, if you pause it, it looks like he's a droid in the bottom, which obviously is false.
Like, after he falls.
When you're slowly like pausing,
Just
going
because of the
through
CGI?
frames, yeah, I think it just looks like his bottom half is almost like where his torso ends is just like a droid, or like it looks like a droid.
Interesting.
But again, that was probably like
They haven't even retconned that. They didn't say he was a
2005.
droid before he died.
no. But that's like a 2005 like DVD scrolling through and being
yeah.
like.
All right, and last one that we'll talk about real quick that I had on my list was Leia remembering her mother. What do you think of that? In Return of the Jedi, she says that she has some memories of her mother, and then in Revenge of the Sith, we see that she was alive for 2 seconds before Padme died. Was she talking about her adopted mother?
No, I think in 83 she was absolutely talking about her birth mother. This is why this is such a clunky retcon, because they
McClunky writing.
Keep it alive.
This is why it's such a McClunky writing, because they put bandages over it and then cut it right open again, and then have to put more bandages back over it. And there are ways even to restructure the prequels such that Leia did grow up with the birth mom. Like, you'd have to restructure it a lot, but there are ways that George Lucas could have done that, and he just blatantly didn't care about that line.
So let me possibly open up a whole can of worms. I don't think this is a retcon. I think this is just a continuity error. What's being retconned?
You know the
The prequels are retconning that Leia remembered the face of her mother.
Yeah.
How are they retconning it?
Because she obviously doesn't remember her face because she died so
You know what the
immediately.
other
So
option
did that
is, though?
change anything, or is that just a continuity error? I think that's just an error.
I guess
I
that
guess-
is a massive error, which they are then.
It's another nuance,
I
right?
guess-
I'm just adding another level of nuance to what is a retcon, because
So,
there's
yes, does a
retcons, there's origins, and there's continuity errors. I
So
think
does a
this
retcon
is-
have to lead to a continuity error to be a retcon then?
No, I think a retcon.
Because I guess that's what I was saying earlier, that it has to be explicitly stated one way such that after it's explained the other way, it is now a continuity error the first way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the other option is that Leia cannot be trusted. She's just lying. Like, yeah, I remember. Oh, okay. So
but isn't there
she was
also
sad.
a possibility that she was strong with the Force, and her mother was dying as she was giving birth, and she just has like maybe
Yeah.
the Force has provided her memories of her mother?
I think that could be an explanation for sure. Yeah.
That's
Because
another
there's
explanation
also-
of still a McClunky retcon.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
I think no matter how you cut it, because that's the implication when Luke asks about Leia's real mother. That's the first time we learn that Leia is adopted,
Yeah.
first of all. And he says, "Do you remember your real mother?" And she says, "Yes," implying that when they were twins, Luke went to his aunt and uncle and Leia stayed with her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And none of that is what happened at all.
Yeah.
That's the implication that they're
So you give it-
retconning. So I give this a emphatic thumbs down, and it is a retcon.
I do give it a thumbs down too because it is very odd. Again, you have the tools. You know that she says this line.
Mm-hmm.
Don't don't have Padme die right away.
Mm-hmm.
Easy, right? You can write whatever you want.
Especially because you don't have a reason for Padme to die also.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
1000%.
What would have been the alternative? Maybe Padme got knocked up on the honeymoon, and when you see Anakin and Padme the first time in Revenge of the Sith, she just has like two 3-year-old children kind of hiding in a closet.
They take Luke.
Yeah, they would have
And
had to give.
she has Leia.
They would had to have given away Luke and kept Leia, which it would have required a good amount of difference from what we got.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd
But
have to
there's a way
explain-
to
you'd
do
have to
it.
explain that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have to explain it a lot. You'd have to like restructure their entire story.
Yeah.
But you could structure that knowing what you knew going into it
Yeah.
in a way that made sense.
And I think also the fact that if she didn't die giving birth and she had Leia, but they knew they needed to separate one, which also would make Obi-Wan a bit of a villain and trade against Leia, even though Anakin thinks that Obi-Wan's trading against him and, being with, Padme, I said Leia. I feel like that'd be an interesting dynamic. All of a sudden Obi-Wan is basically then friendless. He's betraying Anakin, in Anakin's eyes, and he's betraying Padme because he knows he has to take Luke to separate the twins so that Vader has less of a chance to get them. And then then Padme has to go in hiding with Leia, and then we have this, other catastrophic event 2 to 3 years later, which then Padme dies. And then Leia does remember, flashes. Again, it's there. It's all laid out. And so just revert, write it backwards. That's all they needed to do.
You got your ending already.
And if they wrote it differently, it also would have solved one of my biggest gripes when I'm talking with someone that doesn't know Star Wars that well, and they say like, "Oh, Princess Leia," and so her mom was a queen. And it's like, yes, but of a completely different monarchy.
Yeah.
She is the daughter of a queen, but also the adopted daughter of a different queen. And that's why she's a princess. And that's just so confusing.
She really made out, though.
She did.
Luke's over here, farming moisture.
The Naboobian politics really intrigue me. Because, she was queen, but she was an elected queen.
Right.
So
yeah.
it's not really a monarchy. It's
Let's hold until we talk about the realty and the politics. That's a whole episode.
All right, last one, real quick. Let's talk about the origin of Han Solo's name. Do you think Han being Solo and given the name Solo is a retcon, or do you think that's just an origin?
No,
this is like the textbook definition of an origin story where you're learning where someone got their origin. But it's obviously also a retcon. I don't know. This whole episode is just scrambling my brain.
It's retconning an expectation because it's like we don't need that origin. His name
is it
is
even
Han
our
Solo.
expectation that it's implied that this man's name is just his name and it doesn't need an origin for a name?
I didn't think I had expectations for it, but then Star Wars is like, oh no, you do. It's like, no, why are you doing that? Well, his name is Han Solo. No explanation needed.
Right.
That's like if they did a biopic of me and then I had to figure out why my last name is Lewis. I'd be like, oh my God, who cares?
You're doing a family tree, like, all right, who came from Poland? Who came from...
Spoiler, all of them.
It should be pointed out, too, that before we started this episode, Luke pointed out that he is running on very little sleep these last 2 nights. So I'm sure you're mentally exhausted as well.
This is a very interesting predicament that we're in on the definition of a retcon.
I do agree with this one. I don't think it's a retcon. I think it's an origin story, and I think it's an origin story for the worst. People have last names. Not everything has to have a meaning.
Nope. Solo was totally fine.
Yeah. It was a cool sounding last name when George Lucas wrote it in 1977, and some things are just okay to be left at that.
I so frequently think about like what these writer rooms are like, and like whose idea was it? Like, how Han Solo is like kind of a lone wolf. What if that's why his name is Solo, because he's a lone wolf? And someone's just like, why? Like, why are you saying this now? Why would we make this into part of the movie? I just don't get it.
I feel
And
like
it's further complicated by the fact that it was written by 2 completely different people.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if Ron Howard... Yeah, I guess Ron Howard wrote some of it too. But
He rewrote
the
some of
production of Solo was... It shifted hands way too many times.
And I think also at the time, if it's, I don't think they'd ever do that now, but like, I think of that time, they were like, nostalgia was like running super, super high.
Yeah.
And I think they were kind of dying out with it. And so I feel like they're just trying to, fan service every little bit. And that was just the wrong hand to play.
Right. Yeah, everything had to be nostalgic. Everything had to be an
Yes.
origin. Oh, how did Chewbacca come to be known as Chewie?
Yep.
It's like that's
And
again. It's like you don't need to explain that.
The worst part of that, not even, I mean, it is when he says Solo, right? When he gives him the last name, but the music implies that you should feel something, and you feel nothing.
Yeah.
Yes,
when the
that is
mu-
I know
right?
exactly what
Yes.
you're talking about. They like play it like a big reveal,
Yes,
and you're
yeah.
just falling so flat. Like
Yep.
what?
I remember every time I watch it, it hurts because the music stops when he says that, and you're like, and fall.
Let's segue that into a force for thought then, because
Yes,
this is
please.
not related to retcons.
I had
but
one
don't
more
have
thing
any-
to say about this is
Go
that
ahead.
they do stick to their guns, and I fantasize about this gotcha moment that will never happen, where someone asks me like what Kira's last name is, and I'm like, oh, the White Worms don't have last names; they just have first names. And someone's like, oh, well, what about Han Solo? Oh, actually, he didn't have a last name either,
Well,
because they still don't have Kira having a last name in canon.
let's get
That's true.
Max and I's show made, and then we can fit that in.
Yeah, we got a lot of ideas planned for that show. Okay, but no, real quick, I'll tag this into my force for thought then, because it builds off of Solo. And again, McClunky reveals. The thing that always bothers me about Solo, which I really like overall, is the reveal that Enfys Nest is a girl.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
another
Why?
example that they played that as a big reveal.
Yeah,
Yep.
like they took off her helmet, and I remember being in the theater, and I'm like, should I know who that is? I was like, is that a young? Who is that? And then it was like nothing came of it. It's like, oh no, that is Enfys Nest. She's
Yep.
just a woman, and we were supposed to be like, I thought that was gonna be a guy, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
Just-
like they even cut to Chewbacca, and he like takes a step back, like he can't believe it. It's a woman.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very 1970s moment that
It
does
is.
not translate now.
And for a movie that came out in 2018, it feels just a little like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Yeah. Well, let us know what you think. Do you agree, disagree with any of our conclusions over what's a retcon, what's an origin, what's a continuity error?
What our
and-
definition is of a retcon.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for my 5-paragraph essay on the definition of retcon and what it implies and
Honestly,
doesn't.
I think that this episode would have gone a lot different if we went with Webster's.
That's why I said, listen, anytime you get into a conversation with anyone about like canon or retcon or anything like that, you always have to like lay groundwork. Be like, hold on. What do you mean by that word?
Yep.
Because everyone has a different definition. Like Luke is struggling with right now. Like some things can be based off an implication.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on how strong of an implication it is. But please, if you agree, disagree, whatever it is, let us know. Drop a comment, like, subscribe, do whatever you have to do. Reach out to us. You can reach us on the social medias at Force for Thought all across everything. Twitter, TikTok. Luke downloaded a new one. The name I forgot already.
God,
Threads.
you're so old. It's Threads, Max.
Threads. Check us out on Threads. We're very active there, apparently.
Yeah, and then also, when we posted Maxwell looking at Revenge of the Sith during a Taylor Swift concert, his wife did not bring him there. I was the one filming it, and we were enjoying the concert. It was a bit.
Yeah.
Those comments are upsetting. It's like, no, we can like Star Wars and Taylor
someone
Swift.
commented, he was like, be nice to this guy. His girlfriend dragged him there. And
Yeah.
Matt's getting offended, like, no, I dragged him there.
Yeah, I was there, and I didn't even drag him there. We went willingly because we like it.
All right.
All right. See you,
Thanks,
Sammy.
everyone.